The history of New Zealand is littered with stories of designers and innovators who've taken on the world with little or no backing other than the will to give it a go and a piece of number 8 wire. This is the story of one of them. The Britain story is a New Zealand classic, a little-known piece of history in the making. The international press are calling John Briton the most innovative engineer in the world today. At home, he's just another guy who likes to work on projects in his garage, attracted by the simple thrill of design. A Kiwi Peter Pan, a boy who never grew up, never stopped playing. Loose in a culture that prides itself that you can make anything you need from a piece of wire. A culture built on do-it-yourself and on a shoestring. John Briton could just be its ultimate son. At 13, he dragged an old motorbike from a farm creek. It turned out to be a vintage 1917 Indian Scout, a collector's piece, so he restored it in his holidays. Then, while he was still a teenager, he set his sights on building a flying machine and went looking for a mobile home, a house truck, so he could move about and study how birds flew.
He found this old truck and pulled it out of a, I think it was sort of semi in a sort of swampy area, and it was an old international truck, and he just rebuilt the whole thing. And it's in the Queenstown Motor Museum now, and all the tourists come along, the old ladies, and they all want to be photographed next to it. It's really quite beautiful. He actually feels embarrassed about it now.
In fact, the house truck took several years to build. Its time had passed before it was finished, and John went on to other things. But the handyman skills he'd picked up went into another project, the conversion of a derelict stable into his personal show home, a masterpiece of Kiwi shoestring culture. Elegant custom staircases shaped just by hand and eye. Stone columns, hand-carved, turned on a lathe he built with bike wheels. Fittings he designed and cast himself because commercial ones were too expensive. And this, a vast hydraulically operated conservatory made from recycled glass he bought piece by piece as he sold handmade lampshades. The project took him almost 12 years.
Yeah, I used to make lamps by day and work on the house by night. And I was single, and I just worked 18-hour days for 7 days a week for all those years, but it was almost trying to prove, I think, in a way that you didn't need money, that, you know, skill or hard work or what, you know, we could, in some ways, replace it, you know. Instead of going out and making a fortune and then building a flash house, you could actually struggle away with no money and build a nice house, you know, by being resourceful.
The parquet, for instance, came from the old miller's tea rooms. And he spent months, it was rubbish to anyone else, but he spent months sitting outside with an acetylene torch burning the tar off the back of each one so he could relay them. So it's real labour of love.
Then there are the balcony handrails he scavenged from escalators in old buildings and stripped of chrome. The balusters made from floorboards from a high school in Timaru. Anything that gave style without cost.
You know, this sort of rather new idea about being conservational, and it's really not new, not for New Zealanders. We've always recycled things. I mean, it wasn't trendy in the old days, it was just part of our natural habit. It's this whole sort of recycling thing subconsciously happening, you know, to say, not because you're green, but because you're trying to save money.
And it's that typically Kiwi practicality that'll upset the world's idea of how a motorbike should be made. John always had a passion for motorbikes, but he figured it ought to be possible to build them better. So he set about doing it, in his garage, and by hand, with no backing other than a few friends, neighbours and volunteers. On its first outing, the homemade Briton all but beat the world's best, finishing second behind the reigning world champion at the big Battle of the Twins race in Daytona, Florida. The result sent ripples through the international press. But second isn't best. So John came home with one thing in his mind. He had 11 months in which to build a completely new bike. He was going back to Daytona to win.
Now I know exactly where everything should go, you know. It's like having gone through the pains of having a few things in the wrong places. And I got 22 litres of gas in this tank before I only had 16. And here's the computer here. Every 50 mils is a Mark III. Right. So I just slid that through there and measured across every 50 mils, wrote down a whole lot of measurements and ticked them away on the calculator.
I can remember him coming back and saying that there's no way that we can beat, you know, our Works Ducati by building the same sort of bike as them, because you're always going to be second fiddle. You're never going to have the equipment and the support and the backup, so you've got to do something quite radical and do something quite new.
John already had a new engine. That's what got Murray out of his university research to join the project.
John rolled up with a motor to get dynoed, and his arm in a sling with a broken collarbone, and with it all wanted to be done yesterday sort of thing, so took pity on him. That was the mistake right at the beginning, really. Took pity on him and helped him. So
Murray was used to would-be inventors turning up to test their futile dreams. He greeted John without much enthusiasm.
You get quite sceptical about it all because they sort of all roll up with their engines and take them in there, and the first thing they do is blow up, create a pile of mess, and then they get wheeled out again, sort of thing. So, but this one didn't do that.
The engine held together, and Murray became a central part of the team.
But John, being John, wasn't just happy enough with building a better motor. It was, we're going to build a new bike.